Commander Legends has been praised by many for not only bringing fresh abilities and mechanics into EDH, but also for packing each legendary creature with lore and flavour. Some of the legends are brand new, but many are deep pulls from across Magic's history that have been exciting Vorthos players both new and old. Welcome to Magic the Flavouring, the Magic the Gathering podcast, where we talk about all things Magic flavour design and lore. I'm your host, Andy Mann.
Hello, this is Nathan Cancel.
And today we are continuing on with our Commander Legends review. It's not really a review, more of an overview of everything that's going on. Last week we did the mechanics and the design philosophies of the set, where we broke down what we thought about how the set was actually put together and some of the mechanics involved. And we said, didn't we, that we were going to do one mechanics episode and one lore episode. I mean, that was our original idea, right?
Yeah, the folly of our youth.
Absolutely. That's not going to happen because there's just too much going on. We are actually going to be doing two lore episodes. This week we're going to be doing what I'm going to dub quote-unquote old lore, which is to say any of the characters that have got cards in this set where they've have established backstories or established stories or established lore. And then next week we're going to be doing the brand new characters that there are quite a few. And actually, surprisingly, they went really wild with the newer characters. I thought it was going to be all callbacks, but actually some of the new ones seem pretty sweet, as well as having no lore to them. And we're going to cover that next week. So yeah, we've got quite a lot to get through. Just as a disclaimer, I suppose, we're not doing deep dives on every single legend that has old lore but now has a card. We did set a bit of a couple of boundaries, right? So one of those boundaries was we're not going to deep dive on any character that has already had a card. I think one of your choices, which you've paired with another one, is a character that already had a card, but they're not getting their own little slot. Because there are characters in here, like I know you're going to mention very quickly something like the Ghost of Ramirez de Pietro, which would be brilliant, but actually he already has a card. We're talking about ones where we got excited the fact they got a new one, despite the fact that the Ghost of Ramirez de Pietro is a pretty sweet pull, and you will describe that in your turn. We also are not going into just any sort of legends that maybe we saw and were like, okay, like some of them are really cool, but maybe is like on our excitement meter isn't that high because we feel we've only got a limited amount of time. We're really tackling the ones where we think, yes, absolutely, this is a character that deserved their own card a long time ago, and thank God they've got one now. Just before we kick off, though, Nathan, I received something pretty special in the post this morning. I received Magic the Gathering Legends, A Visual History by Jay Anelli. For listeners of this show, if you're also not a listener of the Vorthos cast, which is the podcast founded by Jay Anelli and Lorelei Weissel, you should absolutely check out that podcast because they are doing massive deep dives, especially with Commander Legends. I don't know if you saw, Nath, they are doing every single legend is going to get a massive deep dive from them.
It's good that they're doing that. I mean, we'd be here for hours. We're bad at getting through things succinctly at the best of times. So. Yeah,
I mean I think they're doing like 3 whole episodes on it. I could be wrong, maybe it's just 2, but they're going full into it. But this book is incredible. I knew he was writing it because anyone in the Vorthos community was tweeting about the fact that he was writing this book, and it's an officially licensed and sanctioned Wizards of the Coast book as well. So he had access to all of the artwork, even some of the symbols for things like artists' names are the same ones that you'd find on like the Magic cards. He's done a foreword and acknowledgements, and there's the cover art is like a commissioned artwork by Tyler Jacobson, but it's got a bunch of legends on there. It's got like Sisay and Jared and Atraxa, Niv-Mizzet, Avacyn, Brago, Krenko. So yeah, it's pretty full on, and it's a pretty intensive sort of, not on every legend ever, because the book would be like 1,000 pages, but it is a fairly big deep dive on some of the key characters across many of the different planes of Magic. And I think it's kind of interesting that he released it now, just before Commander Legends, because I suppose that was a conscious choice to not have to deal with all the legends in Commander Legends. But yeah, it's really cool. Jay Anelli is one of the sort of key Vorthos figures in our community. Like, not only does he have a podcast, but he also writes for Cool Stuff Inc., and he is also a consultant for Wizards of the Coast on Vorthos matters. So if you're not keyed up on either Vorthos Mike, although Vorthos Mike is mentioned in this book, if you're not keyed up on Jay Anelli or the Vorthos cast or his writing on Cool Stuff Inc., I absolutely implore you to do so. I mean, the Vorthos cast, I think, is fairly good to say the Vorthos cast was a big inspiration of us doing this podcast,
Yeah, no,
right?
absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Well, all right. That's all the waffle you're going to get. We're not going to talk about the weather or what we did this week because we've got a lot to get through. So I think we should kick off. Nathan, why don't you start us off? Who is your old law hype pick? Your first one? Go.
So I've got Glacian and Rebecca kind of taking the first position. Main reason I put these together is because they kind of both come from a similar time. What I've written here is more Thran characters. Specifically, when we looked at Modern Masters, we had Modern Horizons. We got Urza and we got Yawgmoth. Now Urza was from his time, years after Yawgmoth had already done all his crazy nonsense over in Phyrexia. But we did get a little glimpse of the Thran, at the time, thousands upon years before all of the events of Urza and all of that nonsense. So it was really nice to see characters that I've had kind of kicking about in my head since the early days of playing Magic. I didn't necessarily read all of the old school novels, which, don't get me wrong, it's on my bucket list to eventually do. But I know characters like Glacian and Rebecca and other characters that I'll talk about just in a moment that probably maybe still need to be printed as well. But getting Glacian and Rebecca was really important. They were basically two of the characters that were really influential in Yawgmoth's ascension in the Thran Empire. Glacian fell victim to Yawgmoth's plots, whereas Rebecca kind of developed romantic feelings with him, despite the fact that Glacian and Rebecca were husband and wife. Basically, old school stories were super bonkers. They had loads of intrigue, romanticism, all of this nonsense. All the stuff that we don't get anymore. So,
yeah,
but we don't talk about that. The interesting thing I like about these two is that you get a little look at a time. And the way I wrote it down was that it's interesting when you start talking about like power stones and like the technology they were using, like rocket launchers and things like that. It almost sounds like a modern day kind of like nuclear dependency on energy and that kind of thing. So I think the Thran technology is super interesting. The thing that is interesting about it is if you look at like say old ancient technology like the Mayans or the Egyptians, compare that to modern day man. They're not necessarily stronger or smarter or wiser or have better technology. If anything, they're probably more primitive. So I like this idea that Glacian is a 6 mana costing dude, which, to be fair, probably does him an injustice. I think his card specifically is probably a little bit of an injustice because in my mind, Glacian was this massive, prolific artificer of Thran technology, which if Urza's only catching up on the curtails of this and Urza's abilities are very, very strong, it was funny that Glacian kind of got depowered as much as he did. I think it's also kind of interesting that back in the day, cards were really overcosted. And I think it might be a slight nod in the same way Radiant, in the same fashion, is like a 7 mana costing card. It might play down her power and significance as a character within the lore. Whereas, say, Rebecca's abilities, I think, are a little bit stronger, a little bit more like... So Rebecca is a 3 and a white for... one sec. God damn, I have like 18,000 tabs open for this today, so you'll have to bear with me. So she's 3 and a white for 3/4 human artificer. Artifacts you control have protection from each converted mana cost among artifacts you control. Now, that's actually a really simple bit of text, but it's actually really, really powerful. It also she has partners. So you can, in lore, have both Rebecca and Glacian playing together, which I really like. I like this idea that the two cards actually work in concert together as well. But she was an architect. She was, as an architect of Ascension, she was a prolific architect, whereas he was an artificer. So she built most of the cityscape around Halcyon, which is the Thran capital city. And I like this idea that the more that you build, the more she protects. And the idea being that if you build up, a 4-drop and a 5-drop and a 6-drop and all of this nonsense around her, she's able to kind of bind that together in a way that's kind of infallible. That's really, really cool. The fact that we actually get to see a face to these people as well, like a face on the cards, this is really important. Everyone likes super sexy Yawgmoth, like looking a little bit like Nicolas Cage from Con Air. People like that. They like having a face that they can put to these names. And I think that it's funny that I think certain characters got like mythical status, say like Sakashima, for example, whereas I'd have put Glacian at the mythic status for myself because I've known about these people for so long, and now I finally got a face to the name. Don't get me wrong, it's cathartic, but there does feel like maybe a little bit of a letdown mechanically.
It's interesting with these old legends from the Dominaria stories, but even within the concept of the Dominaria stories and the Weatherlight Saga, these characters are ancient characters even by those standards.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny that I think Wizards of the Coast, whilst they're still trying to push for the old stories to be recognised and to be paid homage to, I mean, they're not the only characters from that time period that we have had printed recently. But, when you're talking about the Thran Empire, most players don't even know that name if they've come to the game in the past few years outside of commander cards like Thran Dynamo or Thran Temporal Gateway. And, having this sci-fi fantasy element, I think even now, even in a set like Commander Legends, is something that they don't necessarily want to bank on too hard. Because as
Yeah.
soon as you start putting these cards at mythic level, people start going, "Oh, hang on a minute, is like Magic's actually much more of a sci-fi game than I realized?" Because the
Hmm.
Weatherlight Saga was essentially sci-fi fantasy. So yeah, I see what you mean, but it is great to have these characters back.
Yeah, because it's also interesting a lot of the way that their power stones worked and thing like Glacian ended up dying from phthisis, which is basically like power stone radiation. I know, shut up. Which is, and the way I look at power stones, almost like uranium and things like that. It does feel almost like
Yeah.
nuclear energy, which is really interesting to think. And we talked about this during my Tron video about how it's almost like really ancient technology having almost like futuristic abilities. And it's funny because his ability to you tap him and tap X untapped artifacts, look at the top X cards of your library, put one of those cards into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. As a line of text, that's not hugely powerful, but it is very demonstrative of his abilities. And what's also really interesting is that he ended up having a latent Planeswalker spark that never got used, but the Power Stone that ended up killing him was the Power Stone that not only fueled the portal between Dominaria and Phyrexia, but was also the Power Stone that got split into the Might Stone and the Weak Stone, starting the whole of the Brothers' War
Yeah.
saga. So annoyingly, what we haven't said is that I've kind of taken like the older characters and he's taken the newer characters, and I've tried to do like mini breakdowns. And even now, talking like at the speed I'm talking at, I've had to ignore 3 paragraphs of bullet points because old school lore is fucking insane, guys. Okay,
It's big.
go and
It's
read
real
some of
big.
it. It's got so much, it's so protracted, it's got duplicity, it's got so many layers to it. We're going to get to that with my other characters as well. But just from a get-go, getting Glacier and Rebecca, characters that I've had in my head for so long, that a lot of old school players would have had in their head for so long, may not mind about the power level being low. Obviously, Urza and Yorkmort, you wanted to be super pokey and amazing, and plus Modern Horizons, it's playing to Modern, not, to Commander. The fact they can partner together, all of this nonsense, beautiful, love it.
Excellent, cool. I think yeah, I think they are very cool. I'm really glad to see them back. As Nathan said, I am taking some of the newer characters. As in, I don't know if we decided what newer meant. I think in my head, it's like Mirrodin to now is kind of newer. Is that fair?
I think Mending, we didn't actually say this, but I'm thinking about now, Mending is probably about the right time, because that's about the time when you had all of the old school, super powerful old walkers, which is kind of hard, before we even had Planeswalker as a card type. So it was quite hard then to define power levels and everything, and maybe cards back then, even if you look at power levels of the cards mechanically, they're all 7 drop 3/3s and stuff like that. It is a different time. I feel like everything post-Mending is kind of like the modern era of design as well as the modern era of lore.
For sure.
Loosely.
Well, my first 2 characters, and I've done the double up thing as well with some of these partner ones to fill one of my kind of pick slots, is very recent. Well, I say very recent, relatively recent. Who knows what time is anymore? My first one is Malcolm, Keen-Eyed Navigator. 2 and a blue for a 2/2 legendary creature, Siren Pirate. Flying, whenever one or more pirates you control deal combat damage to an opponent, you create a treasure token for each opponent dealt damage, and it has partner, and the partner for him, like the kind of flavorful partner for him, is Breaches, Brazen Plunderer. 3 and a red for a legendary creature, Goblin Pirate, 3/3 menace. Whenever one or more pirates you control deal damage to your opponents, exile a top card of each of those opponents' libraries. You may play those cards this turn, and you may spend mana as though it were any color to cast those spells, and it has partner. So we have Breaches and Malcolm. Malcolm's been getting a lot of flack in the Magic community.
Poor guy,
when this card got spoiled, people didn't know who Malcolm was as a character, and so when people just saw, oh, it's a Siren who's called Malcolm, it just and I think this almost prompted us to kind of go, no, we have to do a lore episode, because I think someone in our own play group was like, who the hell is this guy? And this is one of these characters for me. The reason they're my first pick are the kind of epitome of why a set like Commander Legends is so important and so fun, because you can put these characters in, and as soon as someone went, oh, Malcolm, that's a weird name, who is this guy anyway, people like you and me can launch straight into, oh my god, you need to read like the Ixalan stories, you need to learn
pull
about
your
the
fucking
belligerent
sleeves up moment, isn't it? It's like, oh buddy, let's go.
Yeah, this is exactly us. So who these characters are, let's break it down. So they were first introduced in the Ixalan web fiction stories in 2017, written by Alison Lurs. The whole thing was written by Alison Lurs. We've often cited this as being one of the better story arcs in recent memory for Magic Story. They are both members of the Brazen Coalition of Pirates. So the Brazen Coalition is the kind of collection of all the different pirate captains and armadas that make up the pirate tribe on Ixalan. And specifically, they serve on the Belligerent under Captain Vraska. Yes, that Vraska. during her quest for the immortal sun during the Ixalan stories. They have what I would describe as an odd couple dynamic. So Malcolm the Siren is very sort of calm, and as sirens are generally, they're sort of very ethereal. They're very sort of skyward looking, and they're kind of clean and prim and proper. Even the piratey ones tend to be like the intelligent pirates rather than the kind of brutish orcs or the kind of scatterbrained goblins. And then Breaches throughout all the stories, like everything he says is meant to be kind of annoying. Like everything he says is a shriek. He's always going gold, beer, gold, gold, and
Everything's
just the
capitalized, isn't it? In
oh
all of
yeah,
his flavor
yeah.
text.
Like he's not you. You would like him despite the fact that he's annoying. He's an annoying asshole. But these two are like best friends. So I think that's kind of a cool dynamic. I've put down here. I'm doing what you do, which is comparing things to other IPs. Malcolm is the Legolas, and Breaches is the Gimli.
Nice. And who doesn't want a Legolas Gimli sitcom? Like these guys deserve a mini series.
It's funny that you mentioned whether they get their own miniseries or not, because they kind of got the pilot episode for one. So at the end of the Ixalan stories, so the Ixalan arc basically revolves around the 4 tribes of Ixalan racing towards the golden city of Erazka to try and find the artifact known as the Immortal The Immortal Sun. So it's basically like the greatest race adventure type thing, going for this MacGuffin. And the writers for the Ixalan story arc commissioned 4 individual mini episodes, or like as an epilogue to the main story, so that the public could vote on which tribe won the Immortal Sun. So they left the last episode relatively open-ended, and then the epilogue would be, so who do you want to see finally get the artifact? Do you want it to be the pirates, the merfolk, the Sun Empire dinosaurs, or the Brazen Coalition pirates? And they wrote a story for each of them. I think it was the Sun Empire, weirdly, was the one that got voted for the most. Did you vote in that?
I did. I think I cannot remember who I voted for. I think I did vote for the Sun Empire because I think it made sense for me in terms of like momentum of the story. Like I think it made sense for them to claim the city back for themselves. I didn't want the vampires to get it at all, and for me, I felt like the pirates didn't necessarily need it. I like the idea that there was a race to it, but I feel like it was always the ownership should have felt to the Sun Empire because it was their city already. I think that's why
I think I voted for the vampires simply because they had the least amount of votes, and I was like, well, I didn't want the Sun Empire to do it. But anyway, long story short, in the Pirates epilogue, because they all got released, Breaches and Malcolm are the only pirates left because other crewmates of the Belligerent weren't there anymore. Vraska and Jace had planeswalked away. So they were literally there with this golden city ready for the taking. So they become co-emperors of the golden city of Erazka, and the last story is them basically having turned the golden city into a pirate den in Ixalan, and everyone's like got a shit ton of gold and everyone's partying and playing cards, and they're now yeah, exactly. So they kind of did get their own little pilot episode of like what we could have if people had voted the correct way.
Even though neither of us did.
I mean, neither of us did, no, clearly. So I think the cards, as the cards go, I think they're fine. I think they very much slot into the pirate tribe archetype of this set, and obviously trying to like backdate it to the Ixalan pirates as well. I kind of feel like, although having the impulsive draw effect on Breaches is kind of cool, because it's like the goblin is just like throwing things out the toy box. He's very much like Grenzo, Havoc Razor, in that feeling of where he's just looting things and trying to find a good thing to use. I kind of feel like he should have been the one to make treasure tokens, because he is very obsessed with gold throughout the stories. And although it would be kind of boring, I suppose it would be very boring, I kind of thought Malcolm, because he is a navigator and a siren and he's a flyer that can kind of see for miles, some sort of like draw effect, maybe, like whenever a pirate deals damage, draw. But then that's kind of boring. So I don't know. I think they're fine representations. They are uncommons as well, so they can't be too splashy. And yeah, I would happily build a slightly lower powered pirate deck with these two at the helm, I think, even though it cuts out black, which is annoying. But there we go. So yeah, that's Malcolm and Breaches.
Very cool, very cool. Okay, what I like is we're going to be swinging from like recent to old school quite polarizingly. So my next one is Belby. Now Belby's super interesting. Belby is a black-green 2/2. We've already talked about this last week, but she's a legendary creature zombie elf. At the beginning of each player's post-combat main phase, that player adds two generic for each of your. Sorry, actually, two colorless, not two generic. Two colorless for each of your opponents who lost life this turn. Now that's already a very nuanced bit of mechanical flavor, but in terms of some backstory, Belby originally was born as a villa, Eladamri's princess daughter. She was killed and reborn as a Phyrexian cyborg, with the charge to oversee the selection process of the new Envinkar. Now, the Envinkar is basically like a big, almost like a lieutenant, essentially. And the three different people that could have been were Krovax, Graven, and oh god, why have I forgotten?
Urtai.
Urtai, thank you, good God. Before he got all corrupted and multi-handed. And the idea was that she so after she was killed and reborn, she lost all of her memory. She's almost like AI, you know, when you have AI in films where they're slowly gaining purposeful sentience where and so she's basically sat in the middle of this political intrigue, which plays very much into her card as well. In the story, she starts to rebel, makes decisions of her own. She even falls in love with Urtai. They start a romantic relationship. Ultimately, she betrays the Phyrexian cause to assist in her father's escape after her and Adamri cross paths, and she's confused as to why he reacts so vehemently against her, because obviously she looks exactly like she did before. And then he ends up killing her with using the exact same poison that was used to kill her initially, which is a great irony. So in the end, she ends up dying, kind of betraying the cause. And she ends up being almost like, she's like the protagonist, essentially, of her main storyline. You see everything from her perspective, which is really interesting. I like this fact this plays into her card, because she is essentially sat in the middle watching everyone hit each other, and everyone's benefiting from dealing damage to each other. Now, it also a little bit of Zancha's kind of a similar time, being a sleeper agent playing both sides, and I like that kind of political intrigue. You don't get that as much these days. As I wrote here, is first off, stories used to be so good, which is another statement, because again, like you had nuance, like you had a massive protracted nuance to the stories, which you can do in grand novels where you have like a series. So you can actually have a lot of character for a story presented in a simple line of text. You're like, oh, okay, well that plays into this idea that, you know, that she was a silent observer in all of the chaos. And I think maybe she deserved to have something like Death Touch or something to denote the fact that she was supposed to be exceptionally strong. Being a 2/2, I think, kind of undermines her a little bit. And she had previous cards like Belby's Armor, Belby's Portal, but not having a card herself back in the day. It's funny that now we see her now in modern times, and she is still only a 2-mana 2/2, which is, you know, a curiosity. I think maybe she needed something to denote the fact that she was a cyborg, because you don't actually see that in the artwork at all. You wouldn't know unless you read into the lore. And it also would have helped her trigger herself as well. So beyond that, I think it does play to the character very well. I like the look of it, and also it's a character that, again, if you've got a character on named cards and you don't have the character itself, there is a big question as to why. We're going to get to this a little bit later as well. There's with Neverinial, where if you have a name floating around in the space for years and years and years and years, eventually it's either forgotten, which for some people, I think like Belby was forgotten by most, because it's she was a character from back in the day, you know, looking at 20 years ago now. So, you know, it's hard to maybe grab people's attention for a character like that has a bit more nuance, but I think they did a very good job of it.
It's interesting as well, because she is a very instrumental part of a lot of big hitters' story arcs. Like, not only having her own storyline, but Eladamri is a fan favorite elf who was, you know, a pivotal character during the whole Weatherlight saga. So to have a character that is so tied to him, and characters like Urtai and Krovax and whatever else not have a card, is very strange. I wonder if maybe she would have seen a card sooner had her cards with her name on it, like Belb's Armor and all that kind of thing, been more of a staple in more formats, right?
Yeah,
I wonder,
like the
because then she would have been
pretty strong. But I mean, again, it's a niche. It's a tribal synergy card. I mean, she does have one other card, but I mean, it's so forgettable. I didn't even realize it was a card until I searched it up. So yeah,
I have seen online. I wonder if this is in Maro's blogger talk, or where I've seen this before. But maybe it was in the. Oh no, it could have been in the article, which kind of broke down some of the lighter notes on these characters. They did have a card designed for her at the time, but it was built around steel effects, and it wasn't a mechanic that they thought felt fitted with the rest of the set. So she did have a card design at one point, but they never pulled the trigger on actually printing it.
Yeah,
so
it seems interesting when she's the protagonist, and obviously Krovax, Urtai, Graven, all of them got cards of their own design. It was interesting the fact that she didn't have one. Obviously, these are the kinds of sets where this is where we can kind of, you know, right those wrongs.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. All right. So my next character up, which I'm going to talk about, is Lysa, Shroud of Dusk. We've already discussed how to pronounce this name. I thought it might be Liesa, but you've gone for Lysa,
I think Lysa,
and
yeah.
I'm inclined to agree with you because I think
I
Liesa
also
is a
think it
weird.
plays to the fact that Lie and the fact that she kind of goes against, I don't know, it seems to be evocative of
Yeah,
her as a character as well. Yeah.
for sure. So Lysa, Shroud of Dusk, is 2 white, white, and a black for a 5/5 legendary creature angel. Rather than pay 2 colorless for each previous time you've cast this spell from the command zone, so the command attacks this game, pay 2 life that many times. Flying lifelink. Whenever a player casts a spell, they lose 2 life. So very Orzhov feeling card here, and also some direct reference to the command zone command attacks, which being the commander set, you'd expect that to happen. So who the hell is Lysa? Well, she's actually been a character in the lore for quite some time. It's just the fact that we haven't ever had a name for her. Lysa is the 4th sister for the angel sisters of Innistrad. So you have Sigarda, Gisela, and Bruna were the other 3 sisters, and Lysa is this 4th one, obviously creating the. So they're all white, but then one's white green, white red, white blue, and now we have the white black one. Before Avacyn was a thing on Innistrad, because Avacyn, if people don't know, is actually a construct created by Sorin. She's an artificial angel that is just made to be the most powerful one on the plane. These 4 angels were the kind of dominating angelic forces on the plane, and they had their own flights. She's always been in the background. The reason we don't know who she is because Avacyn has banned use of her name because of Lysa's practices and the practices of her flight. We knew that she was there in the background. We know that Avacyn at one point fought and killed this Lysa character, although we didn't know the name. But we never quite understood why until 2016's story A Gaze Blank and Pitiless by Ken Troop, which was for the Shadows over Innistrad Eldritch Moon stories, web fiction. And in that, we get quite a large description. So the description that I've got here, I'm going to lift this straight from the story itself. It's quite a big paragraph. So, and then Avacyn had turned on their sister. It was true their wayward sister engaged in unconventional actions and made unwelcome allies. Sometimes she would consort with vampires and witches, even demons and devils. We must know our enemies if we are to defeat our enemies, she would say. She was often distrusted and disliked by other angels, even sometimes by her 3 sisters. But the 4 of them had a deep bond, and though their sister charted a very different path, still she was their sister. Until the sister had formed an alliance with a demon lord, an act condemned by them all. Avacyn had declared her a heretic, an accomplice to the very monsters Avacyn and all the angels were sworn to defeat. The 3 other sisters had agreed with Avacyn, but did not join Avacyn in her crusade against their dark sister. Avacyn had not needed their help. 1,000 years ago, Avacyn single-handedly destroyed their sister and her entire small flight, and they had made their very mention of her name forbidden. So there we go. So that is like, we did get this in 2016, and we haven't got much more expanded lore recently. But that whole chunk was very sort of revealing, because I think people knew from the original Innistrad set that there was definitely this missing element in the angels, because we had 3 colors but not a 4th one, and then we had Avacyn. So yeah, it's pretty incredible that we got this character finally, and that we get now, as you say, the face to match up with the story. It's interesting, in her card art, she's carrying a spear. So all the angels have their kind of their own weapons, right? In this artwork, the spear is very similar, I thought, to Avacyn's Moonsilver spear. I don't know about you. It's the kind of 2-pronged fork
There
at the
is
end
a
of the long
likeness
spear.
there, absolutely. Yeah, I
I
think there's
think
a
so.
chance that the story might have, because obviously it's the black white angel, and then there's a black white planeswalker creating an angel. There's a
Mm.
chance that he kind of almost not deliberately created her in that image, but obviously maybe stole a little inspiration from her.
Yeah, for sure. I think it definitely, the card itself obviously definitely harkens back to a lot of other demon and vampire cards that we have in Magic. This kind of sort of taxing your own life for an effect kind of thing. Paying 2 life to do a thing is a very demonic pact idea. And interestingly, she's the only angel out of all the sisters to have lifelink, if you don't count the sort of eldritch version of Gisela, because Gisela has lifelink when she becomes a pawn of Emrakul.
Yeah, I feel that's
But
a
out of
memory
all of the
influence rather than her being lifelink weird.
exactly, yeah. So if you take the kind of base level, like non-eldritch versions of the angels, she's the only one to have lifelink, which is a kind of sucking and gaining of life effect, I guess. Yeah, I think she's rad. I think also this is a very different approach to how I viewed Malcolm and Breaches. With Malcolm and Breaches, I was quite shocked that we didn't get them at the time as cards. So now I'm happy that we do. With this one, I think it's a perfect time for it. The fact that we had so much mystery surrounding this other sister, and even when we got a backstory for her, we didn't even figure out who she actually was or what her name was or what she did, really.
It was just a hint.
It was a hint. And to now get the card to kind of slot in, because there's no, I guess I could be wrong, but there's no benefit to the story now to keep that information hidden. The reason that it was kind of still a mystery in even Shadows over Innistrad is because Avacyn was going crazy, and that whole dialogue I just read out was Sigarda remembering the time that her and her sisters killed their fourth sister when she's about to go and meet Bruna and Gisela, fearing that they might now kill her. So now that we have all that information and that kind of story arc has been kind of mined for all its emotional worth, we can now have the face of Lysa and sort of go, okay, this is the angel. That's cool. We have all the pieces of the puzzle now. And so I think it's a really cool card. I also think the card is pretty rad for the character. I think home run for that.
I think so. Yeah, very interesting. And it's one of those cards that's been like wanted for ages. Like I didn't mention earlier, but in terms of like the Thran time, people really want a Gix and they really want a Dyfed character, and we haven't had them yet, which I think is what I was going to do this at the end, but I might as well talk about now. There's a lot of characters that might still be missing that I think if they're quite high the list, because Liza was like I think number 1 or number 2 on Verhey's like list of characters he knows people want to see. So he went through and ticked. Gix, I know, is in that top 5 as well, which means if it's not seen now and people are going, well, why haven't we still seen him? Trust me, it's going to happen soon. There is no way.
It'll be a Commander Precon or something.
Exactly, something like that. So yeah, I think this is one of those, if they hadn't have done this, riots. Whereas characters, as you say, like Malcolm and Breaches, I'm surprised that they did it, and I'm really glad that they did, because it's almost like, oh, well, we didn't get a chance then. When are we ever going to see them? And obviously, these kinds of sets are really good for going, hey, look, there's a wealth of characters out there that we still have to pull from.
For sure.
I'm also going to apologise because the bagpipes are back. I don't know why they do this. Just don't. We're going to work around.
I did wonder what that was in the background of your audio. Cool.
Yeah, it's a fucking leaf blower again. It's fine. Bane of my life. Bane of my life. Right, so talking about getting megalomanically angry about things, let's talk about Tevesh Zat, shall we?
Oh, baby. I'm looking forward to this one.
Yeah, so this is a massive deep cut. So what I really like about this is we got Winggrace. I was going to say last year, but it's not. It's a couple of years ago now. We got
2018.
So we got Lord Winggrace, who was one of the 9 Titans. Now, the 9 Titans, we've only actually seen otherwise seen one of them, and that was Freyalise. Basically, they were a group of planeswalkers brought together by Urza to attack Phyrexia in the initial confrontation between the two of them. They're all horrendously powerful. I say horrendously. I don't know why I have to make it so over the top, but they are powerful levels. I mean, don't get me wrong, there are people among that list like Commodore Guff, which I think is again on that list of when they eventually print him, the Magic community will have a party, because we haven't had a lot of them. There's Christina of the Woods, Taser of Rabia, Daria, Bolivar. These are all big characters that if you don't know these names, fine, but the people that were playing back in the early days, they will have these characters committed to memory because they did so much and they were so instrumental in the early years of the formative story. So we get Tevesh Zat, who is basically an old school Bamf. He's a badass motherfucker, megalomaniacal, evil, kind of on the same par level as, say, Bolas. He's a perfect example of absolute power corrupting absolutely. After becoming a planeswalker and bestowing eternal youth to his sister, the only person he cared for, he grew increasingly distant from the world, caring only about his sister Timmerlin. Great names, by the way, these guys had back in the day. Her death allowed what little restraint he had left to vanish, and he turned himself into a twisted dragonic abomination on an eternal mission to seek silence throughout. So he basically went full evil villain, destroying civilizations, bringing empires like Sarpedia to ruin. He was eventually thwarted in his plans. He retreated to a plane of pure darkness where Urza would eventually find him and recruit him to the protection of Dominaria along with the other 9 Titans. Ultimately, Tevesh would betray them, bring about the return of the primeval dragons, all this crazy nonsense that the old school law used to fucking crack on with without blinking. But he was finally stopped for good, as Urza had predicted the betrayal of Tevash, which kind of, in Urza's way of handling problems, it kind of removed the moral quandary of using Tevash Sat to power soul bombs to drop on Phyrexia. And if that sounds a little bit grey area, that's because Urza was basically full on grey area. He did not give a shit about nastiness, but he kind of took away this guilt feeling by going, well, if I need someone to fuel these soul bombs to drop on Phyrexia, and I don't really want to do it to any of my allies, so maybe if I ally with someone who I know is going to betray me, oh well, it's your fault you betrayed me. So there was this big moment at the end where everyone was like, oh no, he's betrayed us, and Urza was like, I know, it was the plan all along, and everyone was like, you planned on him to fuck all this shit up just so you could use him to okay, fine, good job, Urza. Aren't you a lovely person? Anyway, point being, Tevash Sat, do I think his card represents him well? Big question, right? So he's 4 and a black. He's a legendary planeswalker Zat. Now this is really interesting. Getting planeswalkers from back in the days really is kind of a risk, because this is pre-mending, right? And realistically, planeswalkers back then were essentially gods. They were full-on crazy, super powerful. Now, when I look in context of something like, say, Avacyn is arguably probably more powerful than most planeswalkers. We got to see her as a creature form. Yes, her card is super powerful. So I don't necessarily think that if we got an Urza planeswalker, for example, it would have to read +1, you win the game, -2, you win the next 3 games. -10, go around and happy slap everybody in the venue. It's not. I don't think it's really that levels of power. Like, you can balance these things out. So even though he is pre-mending planeswalker, I don't think you have to just push the envelope on him so far that he feels utterly broken to feel right. First of all, his artwork is incredible. I hadn't actually seen like a proper artwork outside of, there's like a comic excerpt of him looking very much like the the big devil in at the end of what's the Disney film? One of the first Disney films. There's a big demonic
Fantasia.
shadow. Yeah, and it's got a big demony devil at the end of it. There's a comic panel that makes Tevash look a little like that, and you're like, okay, cool, very cool. But both of his regular artwork and his showcase artwork really display this nasty, draconic kind of demonic visage that he had, which I think, first of all, Doom of Fools, what a name. And then with that in his visage, if you don't know who this character is as a new school player, you're going to go and find out, because he sounds and he looks awesome. He's like Obnixilis levels of like,
he's got like a forked tongue, and he's got a lower body which is all tentacles, and very cool.
Exactly, all of that shit. So he comes in with 4 loyalty, +2, create 2 0/1 black thrall creature tokens, +1, you may sacrifice another creature or planeswalker. If you do draw 2 cards, then draw an additional card if the sacrifice permanent was a commander. -10, gain control of all commanders, put all commanders from each command zone onto the battlefield under your control. Can be your commander partner. That partner bit, nuts. Don't know why they do this on some cards.
Yes, that was a bit bonkers to put partner on.
It's the fact that it can be your commander and partner. I'm like, those 2 lines together can't be good, right? And we'll get onto that in a second as well, because there's another version of this that's going to kind of cause questions. But do I think it represents well? Sure. It does feel just generically powerful, which I think he should anyway. Obviously, you want his plus not to be too crazy, but it does fuel his other abilities as well. What I do like is it's demonstrative of using any ally to further his own causes. Especially, you get greater benefit by betraying your own allies, which kind of plays towards that idea, as I said, at the end of his story arc, where he starts kind of turning against his fellow Titans. I like the fact he's willing to sacrifice any and all in his quest to bring silence to the multiverse. So I think as a card, I think he does all the right things. I think he's just about on the power level where you can get away with it, because again, that can be your commander and partner, but 2 very, very strong abilities. I think it cut away from the abilities and potential of some characters, like say Baron Senga, for example, because we could make him super powerful and do obnoxious stuff because you want to put partner on him as well. Fair enough, cool. Whatever. Also partners very well with Tevash for those that want to do like an old school black evil buddy cop thing going on. Tevash Sat and Baron Senga work very well together. Really, really cool, really interesting backstory. Again, super protracted, really great to see him. And I'm glad that they weren't too afraid to actually do old school planeswalkers. One thing that I was worried about when they did Urza in Modern Horizons, I'm like, oh, well, if they went to print crazy like niche nonsense like Red and 6, because it is a very powerful planeswalker card, and yet they're not willing to give Urza a planeswalker card, and then make his, that kind of felt a bit annoying. So then going into Commander Legends, are we going to see any planeswalkers back when they were planeswalkers? Yes, we were. And yes, we might do again in the future. So it'd be interesting to see. I would love to see more of the Titans. I'm glad they're slowly ticking them off the list. We're a third of the way through them now. Come on, Wizards, we can do this.
Can't wait for my Commodore Guff card.
Right? Who Who can't? That's amazing. It's gonna be beautiful.
So next up, we have, going back to more recent times again, I suppose, we have Jury, Master of the Review. Jury, Master of the Review is a legendary creature, human shaman, 1/1 for a black and a red. So Rakdos, whenever you sacrifice a permanent, put a 1/1 counter on Jury, Master of the Review. When Jury dies, it deals damage equal to its power to any target. Pretty cool card. Jury is a member of the Rakdos cult on Ravnica, and this was a character that I think last week when we were talking about the set mechanics, and we were looking forward to this week, I mentioned that there was a character that I thought I'd heard of before, and we were both trying to rack our brains where we saw Jury from. The place where I thought I saw Jury from was the Nikki Drayden Ravnica story that's centered on the Rakdos, because the main demon character of that goes to a Rakdos club, like a theater, to
I
try and
forgot
get
about
his
that
show.
story. That's a really cool story.
It
Yeah.
is a very good story. And I thought in my head, because Jury, Master of the Review, is, if someone doesn't know what a review is, a review in this context is like a stage show, like a variety act that has like sketches and skits and songs that usually has kind of like a political edge. It's usually taking the piss out of like the establishment. So like a lot of comedy reviews will like kind of take on
Mm.
things like the news. So this theme was in that story, but that character was called Ulrich. But it filled a very similar role. But I had seen the name Jury before, and so had you. Turns out Jury has been on several cards in Return to Ravnica block, so the second time that we went to Ravnica. So 2012, he appears on a bunch of different flavor texts, and one of them is Grisly Spectacle, so it reads, "Watch people flock to a murder scene, then tell me we're not all a little sick in the head. Jury, proprietor of the Jury Review." So this character has been kind of in the subconscious of a lot of Magic players for quite a long time, because Return to Ravnica, whilst not being the best set in the world or the best block, especially when it came to Gatecrash, was very much in people's mind. 2012 was kind of, if we're going through a bit of a resurgence in Magic's popularity in the past couple of years, 2012 was the last time that happened, right? It was certainly
Mm.
when I got massively into Magic. I know I've been
Yeah,
playing
we have
with you
peaks
a
and
little bit.
troughs, but that was definitely a peak for sure.
That was definitely a peak.
It's always Ravnica that it peaks with. I don't know why.
It's a very cool plane with very cool sort of synergies, very relatable sort of
That's
like
the thing. It's
characters.
relatable. Yeah, you can grasp. Obviously, the guild system obviously works for people's psychology as well. Yeah, all of that
Yeah,
nonsense.
so it's really cool that they've brought this character back, and I think it's part of their continued push with something like the Rakdos cult to have them firmly in this kind of performers circus of horror sphere, because the Rakdos in general in their very first iteration during like Dissension and like the original Ravnica block, and then a little bit in Return to Ravnica still, was definitely far heavier on the blood cult aspect of stuff as
Mm.
opposed to the circus of horrors aspect of stuff that we saw in the most recent trip back to Ravnica. So the branding was a lot more, yes, we do circus acts and things, but it's more like Gore Chain Walker was a card from Return to Ravnica block, and it was very like spikes and metal, and like the tightrope was made of like a spiked chain. It was very Hellraisery, right? You know, it was very like pleasure
Very
through tearing.
Hellraiser, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
pleasure through tearing of flesh. Whereas in Ravnica Allegiance and Guilds of Ravnica, I think they didn't want to tone it back. I think they just wanted to shift the dynamic a little bit and turn them
Hmm.
more into like the clowns and the street partiers. And there's still the cult aspect there. People still get killed in Rakdos shows, and it's still seen as being like a perverse entertainment. But it's like, oh, we're a circus that also has a cult in the back, as opposed to in the earlier iterations, it was like, we're a cult that also likes to juggle, you know? So I think they've kind of flipped it around. And it's funny that they're using this character from Ravnica's past and then throwing them completely into this clown aesthetic. So you see on the card, they've got like big striped robes and clown face paint, and they're doing a stage show with a bunch of performers. You know, it's very theatrical. And yeah, this is exactly the kind of character that I really like about Rakdos. I love these theatrical characters like Judith Scourge Diva. You don't get many performers as legendary creatures in Magic.
No, exactly. Yeah,
It's
it's
a
like
whole kind of, yeah, like the Bard like subclass, right, of D&D. I would love to see more bard characters in Magic that are actually doing bardy things while still being kind of dangerous. And, also the card mechanics, very, very good for something like this. So again, like the big show thing. So whenever a creature dies, he gets bigger. So that's like him killing off his performers and audience members during the show. The more death that his show produces, the bigger and more sort of like illustrious he becomes. And then when he dies and he eventually gets caught up by his own circus, he like explodes in a big sort of show of power and deals damage to everyone else. So it's like the big finish aspect, everyone wants the big finish, see someone being shot out of a cannon, and that's exactly it. I love this card. I don't know if I could build a whole deck around it. I think it'd probably go into something else.
I'm surprised that he's not a partner. There are some in this. This is an interesting question: is why some were partners and some weren't. Because he feels deliberately not depowered, but he feels like he could have been pushed further. Like he could have had an activated ability or something that causes a sacrifice. He's missing that extra line that say Timur at the Murder King would have had. As an isolated character. And it's weird that he doesn't have partner when I would think he does, because all of his abilities work really well to someone else, allowing, either sacrifice fodder or already having the sacrifice ability on him. Like, imagine him and Baron Sengir together, for example, and allowing Baron Sengir to get the red aspect whilst keeping it within the set. It must be a limited thing. I imagine there must be some. I don't know why we're never going to get an answer. This is completely, just whimsy. But yeah, I feel like he probably could have done with a partner line on him. I think, considering that his abilities do serve function for other archetypes as well, without being self-sufficient in of itself. But beyond that, I like to see jobs also represented in legendary cards, like Kel's Fight Fixer, for example. I like that idea of where you get characters and they're defined by the world and the society around them, and it kind of job titles them. It's not just, I'm a druid. It's like, no, what do you do? What's your daily life? And how does that affect you and inform your mechanics of your card?
Yeah, they're legendary because of the role that they fill, not just because they're super powerful.
Exactly.
Yeah, I really like it. So yeah, Jury Master Review, super happy that they've got a card. This was a very different philosophy to the last two I've said, where it was like, oh, why didn't they have a card? Oh, I'm glad they now have a card because of their story. This is a character where I'm like, I knew them, but I didn't know how. And now that they've got a card, I'm glad that character's in the spotlight. So yeah, very cool.
Yeah. Well, we always had an episode, didn't we? We talked about characters that are mentioned in flavor text that could eventually become... And we didn't obviously talk... I don't know if we ended up talking about Ravnica going that far back, but we didn't even bring up... Jury, and it's quite nice to have characters that they are willing to go back through flavor decks and go, hey, about time we gave this person some representation, because it means that there's a chance they do that for other characters that not only we want, but other people might want as well.
100%.
So I'm going to kind of break the rule a little here, because I'm going to talk about Jessica and Kamal, both of which technically already have cards. I don't know why I'm saying technically, they absolutely do have cards already.
It's not technical, they have cardboard.
Kamal, in fact, has a couple of different versions of himself. Basically, the reason I put these in is because they didn't necessarily need new cards, but they gave the quote-unquote newer generation an updated version of them to play with, and then kept their stories fresh in the mind of newer players as well. Because they are, similar to the Tron episode again, they're a piece of history. There's lots of lore for both of them. The journey is incredible. It looks back to a time with deep, extensive story arcs. Once again, these protracted story arcs where people go off, do things for years, come back, you see them again, like an actual series. Like they've got a lot going on for them, and if you didn't know and you just had them presented in the card like as they are now, it's good to have a massive backstory to kind of like look into and divulge into. Basically, they're brother and sister born to the Pardic Mountains in Ataria and Dominaria. Kamal travelled to the Cabal City to compete in the pits there. He became enthralled by the Mirari, which is a super powerful artifact. Eventually, he claims it and returns home. This is abridged, by the way. There's like books of stuff happening in between the sentences I'm saying, but I couldn't just put lots of stuff happens because that's a bit base. But between each sentence, imagine that lots of stuff happens. So he becomes enthralled by the Mirari, eventually claims it, returns home. Enthralled by its influence, it sparks. He tries to basically take dominion over the entire barbarian clans, and it ends up causing a civil war. In which case, he and his sister are on two different sides. He ends up stabbing her, and this then breaks the spell that the Mirari has over him. He sees what he's done and what he's wrought, and then he basically casts off his barbaric nature in favour of more nomadic lifestyle under the tutelage of Thriss and Nantuko. So this is why his first initial card is a red card, a barbarian card, and then you see him later in all his other iterations, especially in the new card, Kamal's Druidic Vow. You might look and be like, well, why is this, red guy now suddenly having a green spell? Well, this is why. He did bad and he repented on his actions and became super pious about it. Jessica is kind of more interesting. After being stabbed by her brother, she's captured and brought before the Cabal Patriarch. This is back when the Cabal, like the Cabal coffers, reference in those kinds of cards were like the big kind of big bad organization of old school Dominaria. And we saw a kind of a version of this with Bells and Locke in the latest Dominaria story, a missed shadow of the Cabal that used to be. But she's brought in front of the leader, the Cabal Patriarch, tries to kill her, but instead he ends up turning her into Phage the Untouchable, whose killing touch would rot anything it came into contact with. Her and the Patriarch end up bonding and end up having a romantic relationship, end up spawning a child, strangely enough. She's eventually she eventually comes to battle with Akroma. Kamal is there to basically try and rescue her from her untouchable phage state. The two of them join together, buddy up, attack Akroma. In the combination of that fight, Kamal slashes down Akroma, Phage, and another woman called Zagorka. Great name. After these three are fatally injured, they end up fusing together to form the false god Corona. Who then eventually Corona is destroyed. The three men are separated. Jessica, because she's got a latent Planeswalker spark, it ignites and it saves her, and she survives. She's apprenticed under Khan for a series of years, and ultimately he ends up sacrificing herself during the Temporal Rift Crisis, bringing about the mending and saving the entire multiverse. Ooh. So Jessica's pretty important. So the
whole story is exhausting, isn't it?
This is what I mean. And as I say, in between every one of those sentences, lots of stuff happened. So, I mean, that's a bridge. The reason why I bring this up is because, again, it's nice to have these massive story arcs kind of celebrated. The fact that we didn't get a Jessica Planeswalker card, her initial card, Jessica Warrior Adept, 2 red for a 3/1 first strike haste, tap to deal 1 damage to target creature or player. For one of the most important people in the entire history of Magic lore, that card is crap. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm just going to come out and say it. But the reason I like the fact that we gave her a new card is because not only Jessica Thrice Reborn speaks to the fact that she died and got reborn, not only as herself, but as other multiple characters throughout her story arc. But also the fact that every time she's 2 and a red for a 0 mana, as a 0 loyalty counter Planeswalker. She enters the battlefield with a loyalty counter for each time you've cast a commander from the command zone this game. 0, choose target creature until your next turn. That creature deals thrice the amount of combat damage that it would normally deal to a player instead, and -X to deal X damage to each of up to 3 targets. I like this idea, this tripling effect, and this idea that each time she's reborn, she comes back stronger. That really plays towards her character arc. It's much more demonstrative of what she did within the story than, say, Jessica Warrior Adept, her normal creature card form did. The fact we get to see her as a Planeswalker as well is really interesting. The fact they're willing to give some of the legendary creatures, because back then they didn't have Planeswalker cards, they're willing to do that again. Tevash we didn't even get a normal legendary creature card for, so with Jessica I was surprised that we actually got like an updated version. Hopefully it does mean we get others in the future. The reason I really like Kamal is because not only is it quintessentially a green Stompathon fatty, but it's also overrun on a stick. Like at the beginning of combat, he gives all your creatures overrun. It's also a fixed version of goddamn leaf blower. It also kind of fixes his card, because before he had a single green to make target land become a 1/1 creature until end of turn. Now this is really dangerous because you can then turn all of your opponent's lands into creatures with all your abundant mana which you have in green, like in response to a wrath or something. Whereas the new Kamal, Heart of Crozer, 6 green, at the beginning of your combat on your turn, creatures you control get +3/+3 and grain trampling end of turn. That's the overrun ability. 1 and a green until end of turn, target land you control becomes a 1/1 elemental creature elemental creature with vigilance, indestructible, and haste, and it's still a land. So it kind of fixed this idea of, I guess the idea was you were supposed to only target your lands, and then use the original Kamal, which also had an activated ability of overrun to then make all of your lands huge and attack with them. That it kind of got used kind of in a sluggy fashion rather than in a stompy fashion. So I like the fact they've fixed him. They've made him even more expensive. Partner, so you can partner him with Jessica. Jessica does have partner as well and can also be your commander. I think she's fine because she's super narrow. I also think she's super dangerous because you can make a Voltron strategy quite easily and you can turn 5 damage into 15 damage, and you can turn any creature with a little bit of a pump into a 1-hit KO, which I think is pretty dangerous. So yeah, so I think to see the two of them, I think they do a really good job of giving an updated version of cards, not only fixing problems that they have mechanically, but also making them much more mechanically relevant. As I say, Jessica's initial card, Pants, Kamal's initial card, maybe a bit too dangerous to just straight reprint, giving them both an update and offering the newer players an opportunity to look into, again, a very nice protracted lore segment of Magic's history. Good. fantastic, cannot complain. Plus, it's also the first time we've actually seen the Mirari on the hilt of Kamal's sword, which is a massive part of his story arc, and in all of his artworks, you don't actually see it. So in Kamal Heart of Crows, the latest artwork, it is on the back, on the bottom of that. So it's kind of nice, you know. It wraps everything quite nicely, harkens back to some old school, whilst doing it pretty good justice.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, very cool that we got them. And also, the alternate artwork for Jessica by Chris Rallis is pretty fierce. Like, I've never seen a character look quite so battle hungry in my entire life.
Yeah, the lunging at the camera aspect of it really works. I think both of the alternate artwork Planeswalkers look a little bit more photorealistic, and I think it really works towards Planeswalkers sometimes because they are characters that we are supposed to not only have more affection towards, but maybe you want to show in a more realistic fashion.
Yeah, for sure. Sure. Cool. Well, my next picks are, I'm doing another double, and we've spoken about these guys extensively before, so I think it is worth mentioning them here because this is our most hyped picks for these. And that is Halana Kessig Ranger and Elena Kessig Trapper. So we mentioned these guys. These were spoiled pretty early for Commander Legends to kind of give us an idea of the style of this set, and I think they set the tone really well. So Halana Kessig Ranger is 3 and a green for a 3/4 legendary creature, human archer. Reach, whenever another creature enters the battlefield under your control, you may pay 2. When you do, that creature deals damage equal to its power to target creature. She has partner. Elena Kessig Trapper is 4 and a red for a legendary creature human scout for 3 with first strike. Tap, add an amount of red equal to the greatest power among creatures you control that enter the battlefield this turn. Has partner. These two characters are pretty important for a lot of reasons, really. Firstly, they became fan favorites through the latest Innistrad block because they got a story dedicated to them. I think it was even the first one. So the story Under the Silver Moon, 2016, by Kimberly J. Cranes, and then Emrakul Rises as well in the Shadows over Innistrad half of the stories, also written by the same author. They play quite a prominent role. But they actually date back to the previous Innistrad set, original Innistrad, where you saw Elena appear on a flavor text in 2012's Dark Ascension, and then in the next set, Halana got her own flavor text as well as appearing on cards with the two of them. So it's very clear that these two were like a tracking partnership. They're also pretty important because they are a same-sex couple, which, you know, because of Magic's poor handling of said representation and said relationships in recent story is a very big deal because they're a very strong representation of same-sex couples. It's just they're very cool cards. Like, both the cards are really flavorful for what they do. I like the fact, I think we discussed this before, and I think you were a bit unsure as to their creature typings with Scout and Archer, but I actually quite like them. Because Halana is definitely the more level-headed out the two. Elena is definitely the more kind of impulsive, emotional one, which goes for their colors. But Elena is the one that kind of, when they're tracking down the monsters of Innistrad, because that is their job, they hunt werewolves and vampires and horrors. When they're on the hunt, Elena is the one that is out front, you know, running headfirst into danger with Halana having her back. But then Halana is also the kind of slightly more diplomatic one. But in their stories, Under the Silver Moon and Emrakul Rises, neither of them ever seem to be inept or incapable, whilst also not being impervious. They do get knocked about. They do get like the drop on them by werewolves and monsters, and you know, they're not these invincible characters that like I think the term is Mary Sue, isn't it? Where people like angrily say, "Oh, well, this character is just great at everything, and nothing can ever touch them." And usually, it's derogatively pointed at female characters in film. But these guys are not Mary Sue's by any stretch of the imagination. And I think they're just really well-rounded characters that fill a lot of decent storytelling roles that Magic can't really do with other characters. And it was really interesting that they also became fan favorites because this is in the same plane and setting as characters like Thalia, who already fill like a very prominent protagonist slot and are already these big sort of, you know, monster fighting characters. But Halana and Elena were so evocative, and their relationship on the card as trackers on the flavor text and their kind of personalities shone through so much that when they did eventually get used in these stories, I think they were just very clear wins for that set. Also, really cool that they don't really get wrapped up in the Planeswalker stories with Jason and Liliana. In their initial story, Under the Silver Moon, they are essentially on the hunt for a werewolf pack in the Ulvenwald, which is the kind of werewolf forest in Innistrad, which is their kind of main haunt too. And in their tracking of werewolves, they do come across the cult of Emrakul, or the start of the cult of Emrakul, which they sort of see starting a presence on the plane, and they come into contact with Arlen Cord, who, as we all know, is a big favourite of mine. And Arlen Cord is the one to point out to them that they're not as powerful as they think they are, the humans. Like, although they do try and fight back the horrors of the night, if the horrors of the night really wanted to, they could probably sweep over the human races. But also that actually the werewolves of Innistrad and the vampires of Innistrad aren't the biggest threat to humans right now, and it is in fact the Eldrazi, or what they understand is the Eldrazi. Then we see in Emrakul Rises that they've actually put their differences aside with the werewolves completely, as we see a pack of werewolves fighting off Eldrazi horrors. You see Helana and Elena fighting alongside them. So they've got this really nice little mini arc within Innistrad that not only gives you a really sort of visceral punch through into where Innistrad's at with their sort of tribal dynamics and where the plane is at, like in terms of its horror and its feeling, but also they're just really well-rounded characters as well. And I think these two cards were a very strong choice to have as the forefront of, like, this is what Commander Legends is going to be, and this is how we're going to treat our new characters or our returning characters, because they, along with people like Malcolm and Breaches, they very much encapsulate the characters that people wanted to see on cardboard, and giving them partner as well is just chef's kiss, perfect all round. Yeah, I mean, how do you feel about Halana and Elena now that now that the hype around them being in the set has died down a bit? Like, how do you feel about the cards?
I'm really glad that I think the cards themselves, I like the fact they work well together. I think they do interesting things. I think retrospectively, obviously, removing the limited play viability, I think partner with is something that really should have been introduced in this set, because I think for certain characters, like my last two, like say Commander and Jessica, it's maybe too powerful to suggest the two of them just go together and only together. But say Malcolm and Breaches, Hannah and Elena, I think there's a certain degree of lore lost when they can just partner up with anyone else. I know we made the joke that only one of them has flavor text denoting love for the other, and it's the other one that's more likely to go off and partner with someone else because their ability can be more abused with other partners in other forms. So I think the cards themselves, I think they're fantastic. I just think that partner with aspect, it actually gives a lot more flavor to certain partners, like say the white-black partner with duo from Battle Bonds. This idea that their husband, demon and angel like lovers, that I think it ties off all of the flavor with a nice bow. I feel like the partner by itself, as much as it creates an interesting, and it does denote this idea that they are supposed to be partnered together, with certain characters, it doesn't really seem to work. So they don't seem like the kind of people that would partner with other people. And then also you can then partner with them. I feel like it just feels like weird lore if you've got Helana and Baron Senga sat in your command zone.
Yes.
That kind of thing I think annoys me. Beyond that, I think they did an amazing job. As you said, these are characters that people wanted for a long time because they do, as you say, they represent a part of the community that doesn't necessarily feel very well represented, to the point of where Wizards almost feel like they deliberately ignored this idea. And we've had obviously certain issues in the past that have made it seem like they're not particularly sympathetic. It's nice to see representation. As you say, it's very important they do so.
For my money, I would have preferred them to have been two colours. I still hold that. I think Elena should have been green-red, and that Helana should have been green-white, and have green be their joining colour. But obviously, for the limited environment of this set, probably not very doable. Would have been a bit too busted. But yeah, indeed. Helana and Elena, we've said it about 5 episodes now that we think these are fantastic cards for the set, and I still hold true to that. So there we go.
Indeed. Yeah, lovely. So we're gonna start talking about the Lurgoyf now. And you'll be thinking, what? Lurgoyf set? Well, Lurgoyf, originally printed way back in Ice Age, has the infamous flavor text, the absolute epitome. And like, this is, so we've moved. I'm just going to disclaim now. We're moving away from characters like that. I feel like really needed printing for a long time for story reasons, for gravitas in the Magic lore reasons. I think characters like Glacian and Tebash, I think it was an absolute. It was appalling that they haven't had a card up until now. The card I'm about to talk about, Hans Eriksson, this is me grinning from ear to ear. The reason that I say this is because on the Lurgoyf, it has one eponymous text line, and that's, Hans, run! It's the Lurgoyf! Safi Eriksdotter. Last words. Now, the reason I love this card isn't because of Lurgoyf. I didn't really know about Lurgoyf back in the day. When I first started playing it was Mortivore, which was the black version of like, say, Lurgoyf, of that cycle. The reason I really like this card is because I happened to open up a load of Unhinged when I was a youngster, because for some reason I was into crazy nonsense chaotic magic even before I realised that's actually what I truly love. And it's an enchantment, and it says Achan's Run is the title of the card. 2 red, red, green, green for an enchantment. At the beginning of your upkeep, you may say, Hans Run! It's the... And if you say name a creature to card, if you do, search your library for the named card, put it into play, it gains haste, remove it from the game at end of turn. This idea of playing into the flavor text here, we had no idea who Safi was, we had no idea who Hans was, but clearly it was evocative enough and it played into people enough that they made this, this jokey card. And then in Time Spiral, they did give us Safi. They gave us Safi Eriksdotter, green and a white for a 2/2. Sacrifice Safi Eriksdotter. When target creature is put into your graveyard from play this turn, return that card to play. Flavor text: in the blink of an eye, she strode from deep snow to dusty waste. From the crease of light behind her, a voice rang hollow. Safi, wait for me! And that's all we ever got again. For years, we had no idea who this... We knew how Hans was. We've seen him in a card art. Don't get me wrong, he doesn't necessarily look exactly like he does in the artwork from Unhinged, where he's been chased by a menagerie of different beasts and monsters, which is, again, hilarious. Looking ripped, by the way. If you look at his artwork in the latest set, he doesn't quite look so... like He-Man, I'm going to say, because he basically looks like He-Man. So it's written in Lurgoy from Ice Age. Obviously, Ice Age is bonkers years old. We've had Achan's Run from Unhinged, a throwback to a bygone age. And that was, again, 2004. That's 16 years ago. Safi Eriksdotter. Again, it's from fucking years ago. Time Spiral, you're looking at 2006, 14 years ago. So the fact that we finally got a Hans Eriksson card, it might be the most cathartic card I think they could have possibly printed, and I am over the absolute moon for it. Now, what it does, not only is I'm amazed because we've got him as a card, and not only is the artwork amazing, Ryan Panko's doing a fantastic work. In the artwork, you do see Safi in the background. 2 red, green for a legendary creature, human scout, 1/4. When he attacks, reveal the top card of your library. If it's a creature card, put it onto the battlefield, taps an attacking defending player or planeswalker they control. Otherwise, put that card into your hand. When you put a creature card onto the battlefield this way, it fights hands. Now, that's a lot of words. What it realistically means is that when he attacks, he's already being chased by a big-ass monster. When that monster comes in, it already eats hands, and then it carries on attacking you. Now, everything about this is just flavor home run. It's like 4 different cards worth of flavor, all compiled together. And also what I really like is the naming convention. Hans Eriksson and Safi Eriksdotter. So they're both daughter and son of Eric. Now, what we need to finish off this feast for the flavor senses is who is Eric? Now, I've got an idea. Now, on the curse cycle, who's been dubbed the planeswalker that's been dubbed as the unluckiest, that Chad guy with the hair and the beard. I reckon that's Eric. I reckon that's their daddy. Not only does Safi have an ability to planeswalk, which is kind of denoted in her flavor text anyway, the fact that she was from one, she started in one plane and then ended up being in another plane means that she probably survived. So bless her, she probably survived. Hans, maybe does, maybe doesn't. But what I like the idea is that she has the ability to escape danger. Hans always gets himself into danger. The unluckiest is known to be a planeswalker that gets into all kinds of trouble and then also survives all kinds of trouble. I would be so happy if one day we get an the Eric Planeswalker, and it happens to be the unluckiest from the curse cycle. That would be phenomenal. So I've been smiling throughout this entire thing. The fact that we have little by little got this story built up over all of the years and it's finally delivered, and the card is evocative of the effect it's supposed to do, even the flavor text, nothing could ruin such a fine day, Safi. Yeah. Oh, Hans, you had no idea the Lurgoyf was after you, did you, buddy? And it's funny, because if you look at the old school Ice Age artwork, Lurgoyf is having a little chompy munch on someone's skull, and I'd like to think it isn't Hans, but it probably is.
Probably is, yeah. Or it's Eric.
Oh, no, Eric has survived, goddammit. We need an Eric. But anyway, yeah, so all of that, all together, everything about it, super happy. And also the red and green aspect on the etched foiling, he looks a bit like Santa. It's got a nice seasonal feel to it. I don't know, everything about this card made me smile. And this is what it's supposed to be. The set's supposed to be about printing characters that make you go, oh, I know him. Oh, I remember him from when I was growing up playing Magic in my early days. Oh, great, cool. Now I get to use it. Oh, and he does a cool thing. And all of that squeeness that some people will feel with certain cards like Glacian or with certain cards like, say, Malcolm and Breaches. I've gone right down the middle to the really obscure nonsense flavor text characters, because that, for me, those deep cuts, that's them really paying attention to the little things over the years of Magic that the players have responded to, and being able to actually deliver on it is marvelous. Well done. Hats off. Some claps.
Nice.
Good job, Wiz. Yeah.
Cool. Yeah. I mean, I love Hans as well. I think that was a really cool deep cut, and I can't wait to see him across the table. That's a commander that I can't wait to see sat across me. Very, very cool. My last one is, this one is going a little bit back for me. I've been doing the newer ones, but this one's a little bit more of a deep cut. It's Kolfinor the Last U. Kolfinor the Last U is 3 generic white, black, green for a legendary creature, Treefolk Shaman, 3/7, Vigilance and Reach. Whenever Kolfinor the Last U or another creature you control dies, return up to one other target creature card with a lesser toughness from your graveyard to your hand. That is a pretty chunky card. 6 mana as well. Which is not an insignificant amount of mana for a commander, but a very, very cool effect. And this one I will just straight up mention, if you haven't been looking at the cards as we've been reading them, look at the artwork for Kolfinor the Last U by Philip Berberin. It is absolutely incredible. Pure fantasy art. Yeah, really, really cool. So who is Kolfinor? Kolfinor is another one of those creatures which has a lot of cards associated with them, but doesn't have their own card, much like a lot of people on this list. But this one's even more so because there is a relatively popular Golgari Treefolk commander out there called Saproling of Kolfinor, which people should be aware of. And the Sapling of Kolfinor is essentially the offspring of Kolfinor, who is this tree figure. Kolfinor is from Lorwyn, so it's first introduced all the way back in Lorwyn block, and is represented in several flavor texts and cards from the various Lorwyn and Shadowmoor sets that were to come as well. He is part of the Red U tree folk tribe. So in Lorwyn, it was actually quite a deep lore dedicated to the tree folk of the plane, which you don't really get in many other planes of Magic which have tree folk, in the fact that even within their own class and subtype, there were other species and other races of trees. Kolfinor is the last of the Red U's. He kind of represents, both as a character and both as like a color pie, a kind of natural order on Lorwyn of life and death and continued wisdom and the kind of balance of nature, whereas Una and the Fae sought to disrupt all of that balance with the Great Aurora, which was to become essentially the big story arc of that set, is the Great Aurora and the switching from Lorwyn to Shadowmoor. Kolfinor and the other tree folk are kind of the what should be on the plane, the kind of balance of all that kind of stuff. He's not necessarily a good character, even though he kind of does represent this balance. The Red U's use poison magic because their fruits are actually very poisonous to other living things, and he's quite a gruff, like aggressive character all the time, very dismissive, maybe potentially because he is a very old tree, and so he doesn't have time for like the young mortals of the plane.
Damn whippersnappers playing in my yard. Yeah, exactly.
Very much. He very much has that.
Film.
Yeah, very much has that attitude. And I wonder if, like, making him Abzan, because of course he didn't have a card before, and the Saproling is Golgari, but I wonder if making him Abzan really plays into this kind of grey morality of the Orzhov versus the, well, life and death is kind of okay aspects of the Golgari kind of, color pie philosophies. I think it's a very good color sort of triplet for him. His kind of role within Lorwyn, he didn't have the biggest role, but it was the role that he did have was very important. So he was a mentor to Reese, who is a very popular elf commander that I think most commander players should be aware of. And Reese is kind of one of the big protagonists of the Lorwyn Shadowmoor cycles. He was I'm going to use Lord of the Rings again. He was kind of the Gandalf to Reese's Aragorn, I would say. Do you think that's fair?
Yeah, no, absolutely. Kind of
yeah, a grumpy Gandalf / Treebeard. Obviously, you've got to make that comparison. He's the one that kind of sets Reese off on his path of becoming a shaman, and also meets many of the main heroes throughout the Lorwyn and Shadowmoor block. He eventually dies by trying to reignite the elemental Ashling. So Ashling gets doused with water during the story and essentially dies as an elemental, and Kolfinor reignites her. But in reigniting her, sets himself ablaze
Yeah,
and
so that trees and
perishes.
fire don't go together very
Don't
well.
mix. But it kind of, it goes to show this is a big part of his character, I feel, is that whilst Colfanor is a gruff arsehole a lot of the time and also didn't necessarily agree with everything Rhys did, his whole deal is about the preservation of nature and the preservation of wisdom. So like pushing forward and always making sure that the old ways are remembered. So his reigniting of Aisling, his self-sacrifice in the moment, was definitely for the greater good of, you know, making sure this elemental was alive to continue the story and continue the good fight against the Aurora and against the Fae. And the sapling of Colfanor is only in existence because he charged Rhys with replanting some of himself in his home soil, so that he knew when he died, the Red Yew race of tree folk wouldn't completely die out. And the sapling itself would then go on to become quite a large protagonist of the Lorwyn stories as well. So yeah, there's a lot of sort of like behind the scenes lore for Colfanor with other characters. So whilst Colfanor isn't necessarily like a big protagonist in their own right, they are the catalyst for a lot of the stuff of that block and a lot of the big commanders that we kind of know today. I kind of feel like the card itself, I don't know if it's just, it could either be just a very good Abzan card or it could be very flavorful. And I kind of flip backwards and forwards because I kind of feel like he doesn't have any tree folk synergies, but then he wasn't necessarily a tree folk advocate.
Yeah, but also
I
like
don't
the idea
know.
of when he dies, he brings something back. Because the idea being that when
Yeah.
he died, the sapling ended up growing. It's almost like that death rebirth aspect, as you say. The natural order of things is, and especially for trees, when if you're a sentient tree and you know that you can just plant a bit of yourself to create another version of yourself, and it will keep all of your lore and everything, and all of your knowledge and pass it on. It does feel very much like Father Time, almost that Colfanor kind of that aspect. So I think it works. I also think they deliberately didn't try and push the 3-color legends too much. I feel like a lot of them feel like they could have been stronger and they didn't push them to be stronger, and I think that's a good thing. I still think that ability is pretty damn strong in a nice sacrificey deck, which you can do obviously with Abzan colors quite easily. That
So maybe
idea of
that's it then.
perpetuation, I think, works for his character arc.
So maybe that's it then. Maybe the reason I'm having trouble deciding whether I think this card is flavorful or not is because it is very flavorful, but it also just happens to be what Abzan does well anyway. So like if Abzan didn't do that at all, we would be looking at this card going, oh, that's super flavorful. But it just so happens that Colfanor is kind of the epitome of what Abzan is all about as a color tri.
You could lift that text onto other cards, and I don't think it would necessarily matter if it was Colfanor or not. I think that, but yeah, as you say, that ability works to him, but that ability could have been placed on any number of other cards with the same
for sure.
cost.
I think out of all the characters that I picked for the ones that I wanted to look at, this is the one that I am least excited about. But I would also say that any printing of legendary tree folk into Magic that have kind of generically good abilities is probably a good thing, because the other tree folk that we have Sapling of Colfanor, of course, and we have Doran the Siege Tower is another one. But Doran's very specific in like a niche archetype for a deck, whereas with Colfanor, you could make a Colfanor themed deck and make it quite well, because his ability would just perpetuate you being able to play the cards you wanted, right?
So and it also plays with his urn as well, and it plays with his sapling. All of their abilities all kind of work together. It's not just, hey, high toughness, do whatever you want with it.
Yeah, so I think this was a really good pull from Magic. Also nice to see Lorwyn Legendaries. I think we had a couple from this set. I think we had more than a couple in this set, actually. And Lorwyn is a plane where I think, it felt like we were going to go back there soon, but obviously not next year. But then I also feel the same way about Phyrexia. So I think it's always on the cusp of we're going to go back to it. But it's definitely a fan favorite claim.
I think we're likely not to, just because I think they kind of did the thematics of it with Eldraine quite well, and it was just off the bat. It was just before the new wave of kind of storytelling, because obviously it was on the advent of Planeswalkers being a card type and all this nonsense. And there were a lot of the story again was quite, not for lack of a better word, complicated, but it was quite involved. It had a lot of nuance to it. For me, someone who played and started properly playing during Lorwyn, this is when like the collection I built up over the years finally actually got to see use, because I started playing with a friend of mine and got someone else to finally throw cards at. Colfanor was one of these characters that for years I was like, because I got a sapling of Colfanor card, and I was like, well, who's Colfanor? And then I opened up Colfanor's plans. I'm like, who's Colfanor? And then I see Colfanor's I'm like, who the fuck is Colfanor? And and you never get it. You never find out. And it's like, if the sapling of Colfanor is this big and this good and this amazing and indestructible 2/5 that draws cards and stuff, who the fuck is Colfanor? years later, when Nathan has forgotten all about the anger of not having Kolfner, when he opens up on a lovely Tuesday afternoon about 2.5, 3 weeks ago, and he sees that Kolfner, the last use's been printed, I nearly jumped out of my fucking seat. So
Yeah.
this is the exact kind of deep cut that I think, again, they're paying homage to characters that have been mentioned plenty of times, and even I forgot how much I needed to see this character. And the fact they did it, and again, they didn't make it absurdly powerful. It does a thing that I'm like, yeah, that makes absolute sense. And yeah, you can build a nice, like, I would be very willing to do a tribal tree folk Kolfner deck, not just because I really need an Abzan deck to fill out my spectrum, but also because Kolfner's been a character that's had that name in my head for so long of being like, who the fuck is he? I need him now. And now I finally got him. I'm like, well, I can't not build him, you know? That's I like tribal decks. So yeah, I think this was much needed, even though it wasn't necessarily obvious it was much needed.
For sure. Well, that's my one. That's Kolfnor. If you didn't know who he was, now I think you should have a better idea. And also, go check out those lore and stories because they are very good.
They are really cool, yeah.
Do you have one more? You have one more, right?
Yeah, I have one last one. And it's the same similar vein. And that's let me take you back to the initial conception days of Magic, and a guy called Larry Niven. Now, Larry Niven should be a name that people know because the name has been on a Magic card since Alpha. But he's the guy who came up with the term mana to denote the amount of Magic as a non-renewable resource tied to lands. He also wrote the Magic Goes Away series. In that, his protagonist was a warlock who invented a spinning disc that depletes available mana in its vicinity to power its rotation as an experiment to investigate the mysterious appearance of areas where magic grows weak or ceases to function altogether. Now, what the fuck is all this waffling about? Well, the disc inspired the designers of Alpha to create Neverrennial's disc. Now, Neverrennial's disc, Neverrennial itself is Larry Nevin backwards all as one word. Now, since fucking Alpha, Andy, this card has been in play, and it's taken us all the way until 2020, 27 years later to finally get the Necromage himself.
Yeah.
So we finally got a Neverrennial Tyrant of Urborg card. Now, the thing that's interesting about Neverrennial is he was mentioned not only within the disc, but he's also been mentioned in a couple of other cards. He was in 5th edition Drudge Skeletons as being listed as the writer of the Necromancer's Handbook. The Magus of the Disc, when it was printed in Time Spiral, which obviously every card in that set was a throwback to something. Magus of the Disc being the effect of Neverrennial's Disc, which is 1 tap, destroy all artifacts, enchantments, and creatures. So this name has already been around and about for ages. He was listed as the King of Urborg, stated in the Duelist, which is the WotC magazine that was released between like 93 and 98, I believe. Those dates might be a touch wrong. And the thing that I like about this is the fact that we've managed to get a character that, again, has been in everyone's mind since the conception of the game. There's been very few drips and little drips and drops of his name kind of thrown about, but not a huge amount. But because it got Neverrennial's Disc got reprinted a few times, it's not gone away anywhere. It's not one of these names like that disappears because a card hasn't been printed enough times. Like, it's been printed in Eternal Masters, Commanders 2014, Vintage Masters. It gets reprinted all the time. So this name, why is it such a weird name? Then you look into it and you find out about the history of it, and it also ties into the actual like employees of WotC and the people that were involved in the initial conception of the game. Also really, really cool. The card itself does an excellent job of representing this by being a 3 white, black, blue. Now, that will come to it in a second, because I think that's a curiosity. But he's a legendary creature, zombie wizard, 3/6. He's got hexproof from artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. That means he can't be targeted by, damaged by, blocked by, all of that nonsense. Harkens back to the idea that, the disc itself destroys artifacts, creatures, enchantments. When he enters the battlefield, create a tapped 2/2 black zombie creature token for each creature that died this turn. And when he dies, you may pay 1, and if you do, destroy all artifacts, creatures, and enchantments. That same triggered effect, that idea that he's still got the disc on himself. And if you look in his artwork, beyond his super grinny smiley face, looking super happy, he's got the disc literally tucked around his neck. Basically, he's a lich who has phylactery on him. Is that a good or a bad thing? I've actually seen debates genuinely of people going, if I was a lich, these are the pros of keeping it away from me, and here are the cons, and here are the pros and cons of keeping it hidden on my person. Weird conversations that you find on the internet when the spoiler season
When
happens.
have you seen those conversations? When did you go out to look for those?
I didn't go out looking for it. This is when it was initially spoiled, and then we were talking, and then the conversation went on to like, well, why does he have it on his person? And it was like, well, I mean, these are the benefits of having it on your person as a lich, and these are the downsides. And that's where the conversation went from. Look, these are the kinds of fantasy conversations I want to be happening after spoiler season, not just, it's going to break legacy. Oh no, I don't know why I always have to do that voice, but yeah. The reason I like this card is because thematically, not only does it keep the disc um, mechanically bound to the card itself, but I like the idea that as a Lich, the play pattern is that you play. So you've got him in play, you sacrifice him to whatever ability that you have in play, or if he dies or whatever, you pay 1 in spite. Because it says on the flavor text of the disc, Neveriniel's final act of spite was to make sure all of his magic was destroyed along with him. Now, what I like about this is when he dies, you trigger it, pay 1, it destroys all artifacts, enchantments, and creatures. Then you replay him back from the command zone, because you can, because obviously he's your commander. And when you do, and you enter the battlefield, you create a 2/2 black zombie for each creature that died this turn. So the idea is that it's almost like a nuke has gone off, and he comes back because he's a Lich, and he raises all of the creatures that died with him as his new army. Now that is like the most full-on Lich card that I've ever seen and like read mechanically in my life. There has been a fair few, like, Phylactery Lick 5/5. When it comes into play, you put a counter on a target artifact, and it's got indestructible as long as that artifact is in play. Lovely, I like that idea. But this idea of coming back with an army. Now, I've seen enough fantasy like Dragon's Dogma and stuff like that. Even say like Adventure Time, where I've seen enough Lich characters. But this is the first time I've seen a Lich that genuinely feels like it comes back every time with a bigger army each time. And the idea that it has Urborg in the name as well, it's super resonant. The only thing I don't like about his card is why he was white. I think obviously they had to do they did a new commander for each of the 3 color combinations. So Kolfnus might not have needed to be all 3 colors, but it worked to be the Abzan colors. Neveriniel to me doesn't scream Esper. To me, he screams mono black. As much as he will be a knowledgeable fella, calling him a fella, hey, never really old fella. As much as he might be a knowledgeable fella, I don't see where the White Order comes from, really, beyond the idea of maybe, the society of zombies around him, but we've never seen any other necromancer have that kind of thing attributed to him. Beyond the color identity, everything else about him is a home run. And it's amazing to have a character that has been around since Alpha finally get paid homage to, when we actually had very little outside of his disc to really go on beyond a few different bits of flavor text, and yet probably feels like one of the more flavorful mechanical cards of the set.
Yeah, 100% agree. The artwork is also insanely scary. Like, for modern day Magic standards, like, this is a creepy looking dude.
Yeah, that's a good point about the artist. I don't recognize the artist's name that much, actually. Let me... Who else has she done? Oh, there's done actually quite a bit. Okay, fair enough.
Was it Yongei Choi?
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah,
Yongei Choi's done a lot, yeah.
Yeah, I'm so bad at it. Name recognition is awful. Oh yeah, Ishkana, all of that nonsense, fantastic, cool. Yeah, but as artworks go, this is probably her. This is like her breakout one. I think this is amazing. Yeah, super smiley. Again, we had nothing to go on. We had no idea what it'd look like. There's no concept artwork or anything like that we can play off of. So the fact they managed to do such an amazing job, and then also do the throwback of having the actual disc in the artwork as well, I think is very good. I mean, it's kind of very similar to like Tormod, for example. Like Tormod was also printed out. Again, we're not going to talk about everyone, but another name that's resonant throughout players. Has been for years, and people will be going, well, who is this character? Why isn't there more about him? Why don't I know anything? And Legends is the kind of environment where we can go, not only here's the character itself, but the little lore slide that they gave for Neveriniel was pretty much as much lore as we've ever had for him already. So like it's amazing that you can have such pivotal characters, such household names for the game, not have any representation, and still be so, I don't want to say beloved, but as in, like, there is a certain degree of affection towards it as a card when you finally print it, when it has, as I say, like Hans Eriksson from myself, or Kolfner, for example, like names that have been bouncing around my head for years, finally getting paid credence to is phenomenal. And I think Gavin did a fantastic job here when he said at the beginning he's going to be ticking a load of boxes, he's going to be hitting a lot of the flavor notes that people have wanted for years, and he's going to answer a lot of these demands in one fell swoop. Bloody hell did he.
Yeah. Yeah,
still need Gix, but fine, whatever.
They need to keep some in the tank for Commander Precons and Modern Masters 2 and all that kind of stuff. Because Modern Masters 2 was meant to be like the Time Spiral 2, right? And I see where that comes from, and I understand that maybe is what they were trying to do before they kind of scaled it back to be Modern Horizons. But I feel like Commander Legends really is the true Time Spiral 2, where everything is referenced to something.
Everything's a little throwback.
There are some crazy abilities that, have nothing to do with anything, but are still really interesting. And then there's other ones which are very sort of clear and tight abilities that, really synchronize with everything else. I love it. You have a couple of honorable mentions.
Yeah. Things that people that don't necessarily have a large amount to talk about, but things like we wanted to mention. We already mentioned it already. The Ghost of Ramirez de Pietro. We didn't actually do a card him because, again, he's already represented. The interesting thing is he's the only character that from Legends, the original set Legends, that got printed or got a new card or whatever, which is really interesting because the new set Commander Legends, you'd have expected a few of the commanders from Legends when they all were just random characters that usually had, like, randomly like First Strike, which is a 4/5 First Strike in Azurius colours for 7 mana. Shit like that. These are the kinds of cards that probably need an update. It's just hard for certain of them. The only ones that I think that really had a lot of affection towards them were things like Hazim, which already has a very interesting ability. So realistically, unless you've deliberately depowered deck and made some crazy, like deliberately obtuse Legends deck, I don't necessarily think there was a lot to bring out from that. The reason why Ghost of Ramirez de Petro gets an honorable mention is because there was this theory, story-wise, lore-wise, that he was immortal, because he spoke as if he was an old man, but he looked about 15 years old. And what I like is now we've seen him all these years later. Now he's of spirit. He now will live forever. And I think that's quite an interesting. I like that cut. Again, it was also interesting to see that he was the only character from Legends that seemingly mentioned. Like, we didn't get an update on all of the Elder Dragons. Obviously, we got all of those in the Dominarius core set a few years ago, so not as important. But it is interesting that he was the only one chosen. The other one,
from Grixis to Mono Blue as well.
Yeah, well, this is the colorations. The colorations of Commanders in Legends are baffling, to say the least. I would love to have a little sit down 3-hour conversation as to let's have a little muse over exactly why they thought these characters needed to be these colors. Because some of them, like Rasputin Dreamweaver, for example, is really interesting, but again, like being, I don't know, his effect actually works towards being Azorius. But when you give, like, say, a Gruul commander Fear, you really know that they were just throwing random shit.
You're talking about it in Legends.
Yeah, in Legends specifically, yeah. So the other one that we need to mention, which gets 2 thumbs up from me, is the one who hasn't got any. And that's Croc the Thumbless. Again,
Boo.
Fan Vindication. What, is that the pun? Fuck you. The Fan Vindication. This character, I don't think anyone expected to see. If you did, I think you were still surprised to have. Even if you really wanted him in the set and thought you might be, I think you were still surprised to see them actually do it. I don't know if anyone was particularly asking for it either, but amazing. He's a really nice addition to the set. Croc's, obviously Croc's thumb being the W coin flips, and then Croc's other thumb being your W dice rolls from Unstable. The fact they actually paid homage to him. Decently powerful effect as well. The fact you can partner him up with other commanders. He's got a good bit of lore as well. The lore being that he was a gambler and he gambled away both his thumbs, and then in a pledge to get his thumb back, he journeyed all the way to the center of Mirrodin and back, writing about it. Now, how you can write without a thumb, I don't know why they put that in there, that he wrote a whole book on it. How can you write without a thumb?
Well, yeah, but how much did goblins write anyway? He probably wrote it with a pen in his mouth.
Well, he probably just did like finger painting. That was
or used his nail on his index finger. That's what I would do.
Yeah, fair enough. Oh, that's I can see. Look, this is a good conversation already. But yeah, I like the fact decently powerful effect carries the flavor text as well. Because in on Croc's thumb, let me just grab it quickly, so I don't muffle it. So Croc's thumb, I can think of So Croc's other thumb, from Unstable, says Croc was the kind of goblin who'd lose his thumb in a wager and come right back with double or nothing, which is great. The idea that he lost his first one to lose his second one. What's the flavor text for Croc the Thumbless? Double or nothing. Exactly. So the fact he actually quotes the thing that's quoted on that's beautiful. Makes me very, very happy. So yeah, those are my honourable mentions. Again, there are some characters that I think we still will likely see going forwards. There's a couple that we didn't necessarily talk about, say like Radiant and Jared. Jared, I think, is the only one outlying that we didn't talk about because not only was his lore quite obtuse, but it's also a card that didn't necessarily resonate for either of us. Sorry if Jared's one of your favourites. I do think his artwork is some of the best artwork in the set. That is worth mentioning. Otherwise, I think that covers as much as we can cover reasonably without it taking until next Tuesday.
Sure, for sure. Well, I mean, next week, not necessarily next Tuesday, we will be carrying on with our talk about the legends from the set, but we'll be doing the brand new legends, and potentially we'll also mention if there are any legends that we thought were brand new, but we found out that they actually did have some lore, because that's also pretty interesting. Things like Jury that I mentioned earlier. Sometimes you think a legend is completely brand new, and then you realise they've actually been in the game for quite a while.
I like the Salamander dude, for example.
Yes, exactly. If we didn't talk about your favourite flavour pull from this set, guys, do let us know on Twitter at mtflavouring. You can also send emails to mtflavouring@gmail.com. Nathan, your Twitter is...
The Fox in the Moon. Oh god, you blindsided me there. I forgot it for a second.
My one's at Andy Manface. Yeah, we have been having a lot of fun with this set. We are both waiting on product. We're not going to get it at like pre-release speed, but we will get it when it's on full release. And I'm very much looking to building some sealed EDH decks because can't draft it right now. But that's a shame. We also have a YouTube channel. I never mention it, really. I think I mentioned it when we first launched it, but it's kind of a sort of side project, a back burner. We recently released this week of recording our latest Crack a Pack episode, our latest Pack with Flavor episode, where I open up a pack of Zendikar Rising set boosters. And we have a look at all the flavor goodness that's inside. So please do check out our YouTube as well. Hit that subscribe button, and any likes or comments in the video sections are also very well appreciated. Again, it's kind of a side thing for us, but it is also an outlet for us to do things that we wouldn't normally do in podcast form, which is, pretty cool. Other than that, Nathan, do you have anything final to say?
God, no. I think I've very much run out of voice. So thank you for listening this far.
No worries. Yeah, this is going to be a long one, but that's just. I mean, it just goes to show that there's just so much flavour packed into the set, which is only a good thing.
Magic lore is long. Who knew?
Who knew? Well, all that remains for me to say then, guys, is thank you so much for listening. This has been Magic the Flavouring.
We'll see you soon.